Hey everybody, welcome to MetaFan. We have a real special treat today. Butch Patricks on the show. TV's Eddie Munster is here because St. Louis is having its Wizard World Comic-Con event this week, and we thought, as we were talking about it, Elrod and Butch are good friends, and we were talking about, gosh, is there anybody that knows the world of fandom from the inside out quite like Butch does? And so we thought we'd ask you to come onto our show and talk to us a little bit about your experience with fandom.
Well, yeah, the Munsters has definitely got a huge fan base, so this fits right into my wheelhouse. It's kind of funny, the Munsters is 52 years old, and a little 2-year show back in the mid-'60s has gone on to really establish itself as way past a cult following. It's a mainstream following nowadays, and we're into our third generation of fans. It's a great thing to be. Eddie Munster has been very good to me. I love talking to the fans about it, and going to Wizard World and the WizardCon here in St. Louis is a perfect example of what it's all about.
So when did you first start going to cons?
I was one of the early arrivals. When they first started doing these back in the 80s, I had just finished, I had separated from doing the Munsters until 1982, and then we decided, a friend of mine put a guitar lick together, and whatever happened to Eddie. And we kind of ran with that idea and did a video for this new upstart channel on MTV. So the deal was, we went to MTV, we recorded whatever happened to Eddie. We were the first unsigned act ever to be on MTV when payola was all the, you had to really pay to play, so to speak. We got on the air with no money, and they created the basement tapes from that idea. So right around 82, I got back into the Munster circle. Conventions were just starting to spring up around the country, and they needed celebrities to come out and meet and greet. And really, one of the first ones I did was a thing called Chiller, which now is one of the major ones in the country. But when I first did it, it was more of an adult monster and sexy girl thing. It wasn't really a mainstream show like it is today, and it's evolved into where it is to now. So I've been doing it quite a while, almost, pushing 25 to 30 years.
So what are some of your favorite fan events then?
Well, San Diego Comic-Con's always a good one. It's the granddaddy of them all. It's like the Super Bowl of Comic-Cons, and living on the West Coast, I've been down there several times. The thing with San Diego Comic-Con, it's so big and it's grown so huge that unless you really have somebody that's like Star Wars related or something of the I guess would be the franchise situations, it's tough to crack into it. And I was lucky enough because, for instance, the guy that does these shirts was working with Star Wars and Rock Rebel John. Hey, how you doing? plug. Free shirts coming for everybody.
Nice.
So anyway, that's where we started doing that. And then what happened was autograph shows, just celebrities sitting at a table with people coming in just wanting to add to their autograph collections is where it kind of all started. And then it expanded to people that collect toys, people collect lunchboxes, people collect all kinds of neat stuff. And the Munsters happens to be the most, I believe it's the most merchandise show of all time. If it's not, it's very close, but I think it's the first. Star Wars in the movies, Munsters in the television, and because there's like 180 licenses out there, there's a lot of Munster merchandise, and I wind up going to a lot of toy shows and collectible shows as well. And that's kind of where it all started.
So you talk about like San Diego Comic-Con being the granddaddy of them all and how huge it is. And then we're talking about Wizard World Comic-Con here in St. Louis, which is still a good-sized con. We're talking about 30,000 people. And then you also do some smaller shows. Do you prefer doing the smaller shows over the big shows? Do you, where you get to interact with the fans a little bit more?
It's kind of it's funny you bring that up because I just did a thing last weekend where I did one big show and one small show back to back. And at the bottom line, I made about the same amount of money, and we sold about the same amount of merch. So it's really a hard thing whether you get the curve of how many people at a 2,000 person show buy and you wind up making this much money, or you go to a 20,000 person show where there's more celebrities and there's more people and it's spread around. So I prefer to do the smaller shows with being somewhat of a bigger fish in a small pond, less celebrities, more interaction, more one-on-one time, where the bigger shows have a tendency to where you line up like cattle, and sometimes you just kind of go through the system, and the celebrity doesn't have a chance to really interact. I mean, it's not their fault. It's just it's a numbers game. You've got so many people that want to have their moment in their photo that they just can't stop and interact with you. Right. And that's kind of sad. But I mean, the bottom line is more people get a chance to view you, and more people get a chance to have a photo with you. Right. So it's it's apples and oranges.
So in the smaller shows, like, do you actually get to interact with the fans a little bit more? What's the best part of interacting with the fans?
Well, basically, it's funny because I did a book called Munster Memories, and the idea of the book came from what people shared with me at the table, their memories of what the Munsters meant to them. I know what I did. I was there doing it, but it's really interesting to see what it meant to them. And what it meant was It went from where people that were having a tough time growing up, they were suffering from depression. This was their escape. This was their little make-believe world. They wished they could live in the house that I lived in, even though it was television. Kids running home from school, the Munsters being used as leverage. If you don't do your homework, you can't watch the Munsters. Things of that nature that was really part of a very nice part of the 60s, which in general is another story about being part of that particular generation in that decade, which was very creative for not only music but television. So it was a combination stacked. The 60s, being on the Munsters, and then the fan base, which is still around today, with kids and the grandkids watching it.
As far as Munsters fans specifically, is there any commonality or the common traits? Who is a Munsters fan?
Well, it can be anyone. I mean, it really can, because it was such a great show and so many people liked it. But I find the strongest Munster fans are usually people that are gearheads, like him and me. And since I wound up getting the tribute cars a couple years ago, I started focusing more on automotive events, which was really my bread and butter. I'm a member of a car club. I've always had muscle cars and cars like that. So I thought this would kind of be an interesting departure, because I might be the only celebrity running around with vehicles from their show. I mean, Batman's not driving, Adam West is not driving around in a Batmobile, and Knight Rider, although there are a lot of General Lees.
Yeah, it'd be awesome to have Adam West running around in the Batmobile.
Yeah, they're not.
Great idea.
The Duke brothers, they don't have their own General Lees, but the idea of doing car events and the fact that the Munster coach was the first hot rod on television, so it adds sort of a dimension to an interesting situation already. What's funny about the Munsters is there's so many various, like for instance, I do shows that can be considered paranormal. I bought a house that's haunted. It's my grandma's old house, so now I entered the paranormal reality situation. I've done tattoo conventions. You guys can get ink on. So many people have got Munster tattoos on them that I had a line of ink. Horror, sci-fi, pop culture. The list is pretty long, so there's like 6 or 7 different categories that the Munsters falls into, which I like because it keeps me from going to the same thing over and over and over again. And now that I live in the Midwest, which is, I'm not too far from St. Louis, I drag my cars and my trailer around to a lot of smaller events and do a lot of small town. I did Steve McQueen Days last year with a little town of 1,500 people, which was great. It was a lot of fun. 80 cars lined up in the street, but the bottom line, it was a big entertainment day for this little town, which is, to me, kind of giving back.
Do you have the cars with you, or one of the cars with you at Wizard World this weekend?
They're both there.
They're both there.
As long as I have a really cool addition to the, since I bought the cars, I was lucky enough to acquire the George Barris Von Dutch Stingray bicycle that never made it onto the Munsters on film, but I have pictures of me sitting on it out in front of the Munsters house when I was 11 years old, and now that's added to the collection as well. So that's really cool. The bicycle, you'd be surprised. Anybody that likes cars had a Stingray bike when they were a kid, so they really relate to that.
Well, and it's not just that it's a Stingray bike. It was built by Von Dutch through Barris's shop. So as a car geek,
yeah,
I mean it's kind of one of the holy grails of.
It really is.
And if anybody out there watching this is salivating right now, stay tuned, because we have an episode coming up about that bike.
Yeah. Oh yeah, featuring this guy.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's interesting. You were talking about doing the Munster show when you were 11 and stuff like that. What was it like to encounter fans as a little kid?
Well, it kind of started, it was interesting how the thing evolved. Is the Munsters was done at Universal Studios, which was the Monster Studio, and they were really good at this, but they were also the first studio to start with a tour. So in 1964, Universal was really, it was a stroke of genius. They decided to open up the studio gates to people that wanted to pay to see how the magic happened. And the Munsters house was one of the destinations for this tour. And the tour was so important to them that they actually would stop production to let the tour come through with a microphone, and they promoted the fact that the fans should come out, or the stars should come out and meet and greet on the tram.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
To stimulate it. This was like the first time it had ever happened at a studio. Excuse me. But that was where I started interacting with fans. And then outside the studio gates, when they started doing the conventions and the promotions, it was just one of those things that it's a kind of a niche thing. If you either like it or you don't. It's either, I'm kind of a people pleaser type of person, so interacting with the fans for me comes easy. I know some people it's difficult and they didn't like doing it as part of the job, but for me, I always enjoyed it. In fact, one of the biggest first promotions that I did on my own was I flew to Phoenix, put on my own makeup on the airplane for an hour, met with a guy named Bob Burns who had this gorilla suit named Kogar, and Bob Burns is legendary for being a gorilla guy. And we did an appearance, just me and him, in front of the first mall in America called the Thomas Mall in Phoenix. 5,000 kids showed up. I had to sign 5,000 autographs. It was like really overkill for, it was a little intimidating, but it got me comfortable in doing what I did, and I was really at the early stages of this whole thing.
That's amazing. Someday we'd love to have Bob on. I had
Oh,
a
that'd be
question
great,
for you to kind of follow up on that because I was thinking about this and we didn't talk about it. But what's a thing if you're a fan or you see this side of it? The fans should probably know what is an appropriate way to approach somebody like yourself in your opinion. You know, if somebody sees you at the hardware store, is it appropriate to come up and talk to you?
I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah?
You know, I don't. That's at the hardware store. Whenever you're walking around, if you're eating a meal, that's kind of probably best to wait until someone's done and don't catch them like in mid-bite and chewing. You know, that's kind of private time. But if you're like walking around, you know, a hardware store or something like that, or you're on the street, you're pretty much. You know, as long as they're polite and they come up and they don't gush and they don't hang out, and they don't want you to sign something like that. You know, I will offer to sign something if someone's there or pose for a photo because that's just what I do. But some people don't like that, so just kind of run with it and flow with it and see how receptive the person is. But yeah, mainly that's kind of how that works out. And if you're at a table, if I want to come up, if you want to get a picture taken, or if you're on the street and you want to do a selfie, be prepared to say, hey, can I take a selfie? Click, and then be on your way. Don't hand it to somebody else and make you stand there and, oh, it's my wife's phone, and I just got this phone. I haven't figured out how it works yet. If you're going to do it, be prepared and make it quick and snappy, and usually that'll do the trick.
It's interesting you mentioned like at the hardware store and just being out in everyday life. When you were 11 working on the Munsters and weren't in makeup, did you get recognized down on the street, and how did you handle that?
No, not at all. That was not a problem at all. The only thing that I had a problem with was going back into the public school system afterwards because I was at a big junior high school with 3,500 kids, and kids will be kids, and anybody that's out, anything that's different, not really a bullying situation, but more of a, he did TV, Magic Box, and I was little, and then kids just out of curiosity have a tendency just to overwhelm you. But I survived it, which gave me thicker skin, and people skills came into play. Made friends with a 9th grader real quick, and pretty soon problem solved. You know, get your muscle.
Had your own bodyguard.
Get your muscle. Get your posse. That's right. But it's true though. I mean, I had a tough time going back into the public school system, but it made me a stronger person.
We talked about Munster fans. I'm sure most people know this, but you had another television show that you did after the Munsters in Lidsville. Do you have a lot of people who come up to you and talk to you about that one?
Lidsville is pretty popular. Yeah, it's the Sid and Marty Krofft. What was it? The World of Sid and Marty Krofft, I think they called themselves.
Yeah.
They were very imaginative. They had some very successful shows. Puff and Stuff, The Bugaloos, Lidsville, Sigmund, Land of the Lost. They have a very long list of successful shows. But it was totally psychedelic, and you got to remember it was the 60s. Psychedelic 60s led to the 70s, and it was, I mean, at the time I did it, I wasn't really happy about it, but it was a Saturday morning show with a big paycheck. So I figured none of my friends would see it. They'd be, you know, their hangovers would keep them in bed. But as it turns out, it ran for a long time, and now in hindsight, I look back upon it, and it was really a cool experience. Charles Nelson Riley, Billy Hayes, the Krofft people. I actually did before the Munsters. I did a year of The Real McCoys, which was a great show with Walter Brennan and Richard Crenna. I did about a half a year of General Hospital when I was 7 years old, which was good training because they actually shot live back then. So that was, I actually had and I did a few years of My Three Sons after the Munsters. So I had a nice, from 1960 to 1971, I did a lot of work.
Yeah. So as far as the fan experience, have you had any sort of memorable, super standout experiences interacting with fans anywhere?
Well, the cars that I own right now, when I first met him, I was at a haunted attraction in Luray, Virginia, and he drove up dressed as Grandpa in his Munster coach to pick me up and drive me around. And it was like, you can't believe we just pulled up to this hotel. We became friends. We worked together for 4 or 5 years, and he retired 2 years ago and offered me a chance to take the cars off his hands. Actually asked me if I knew anybody. I said, yeah, right here, look no further. And that kind of worked out really well, that I wound up with the tribute cars. They're not George Barris cars, but they're really solid.
They're really good.
They're really good looking cars, and they're street legal. Well, at least the coach is. And I go around, and one of my favorite things to do is go to drag strips and recreate the Hot Rod Herman episode where we go to Lions drag strip, and we've lost the Munster coach. Grandpa builds the Dragula, and a happy day, we win it back. And this guy's actually been in one of the races driving the Munster coach. So that's what I really enjoyed doing.
Highlight of my life.
Well, because I grew up around the drag strip when I was 16, 17, 18 with Jack Chrisman, who invented the funny car. So I've been lucky all my life between the movies and drag racing, and my dad was a pro ball player. So if I wasn't at the studio, I was at the ballpark with the pros. So I've been a very lucky little kid. Oh, I was a lucky little kid. Now I'm a lucky adult.
Outstanding.
So, with your dad being a pro ball player, it's interesting you mentioned that. With your dad being a pro ball player, did you catch any fandom from that? Did people recognize you as his son?
Not too bad. And the FatherSon Games, you'd be in the little uniform and stuff. But no, I was pretty much behind the scenes. I was happy just to be at the ballpark shagging flies and getting to meet the other players. And I didn't really take it seriously. I didn't really know what I was experiencing. So I think the fact that I didn't think of myself as anything special is kept me from getting a big head and getting cocky and and thinking of it. I thought, honestly, I was a little naive. I thought everybody did what I was doing. I really thought everybody had a pretty exciting existence. I was kind of naive to that fact that I really wasn't aware of it till later.
Yeah.
Well,
You said you had something you wanted to do.
oh, actually, I do. I'm gonna pull fanboy again, and even though you and I are good friends, I recently acquired one of my Holy Grail pieces for my Munsters collection. I have the Munsters lunchbox that I've been hunting forever, and
Yeah.
would you sign my lunchbox, Butch?
You want to see a grown man cry?
Those things are hard to come by.
Be happy to.
Thank you.
And what I'll do is I'm doing this, I will mention to you, if you want to do what I'm doing right here, we actually do this for fans that can't come to Wizard Worlds. Go to Munsters.com. We have a Facebook there. We have mailing. We have all kinds of opportunities that you can either buy stuff that I have for sale on my store, or you can send your stuff to me and you can get it signed. I just want to let you know that if you can't make it to a con, have no fear. Butch is here.
And that we'll have also a calendar of events that you're going to be doing.
I have a schedule there. I travel around the country with my cars, and sometimes I leave the cars at home and fly places that are a little too far to drag them, but there's a very extensive deal, and my wife Leela runs the official Munsters fan group like nobody's business, very interactive, very family-friendly, spam-free, and if you want to just join the club, which is almost 11,600 and change right now, we have a lot of fun with it, and she posts things daily through the night sometimes. So if you like the Munsters and you want to catch up, it's a great place to go, the official Munsters fan group. You want this personalized?
Well, yeah.
You're not going to be selling it?
No.
I mean, he's a fan, but merchandise, right?
Oh, we're going to have to get another pen.
Oh, man.
Oh, it's working now.
Oh, there we go.
There you go. Just need to be fired up. There you go. So it was interesting, at the end of the book on Munster Memories, they asked me what my favorite memory was. And you got to understand that I was working on the Munsters. That was my job. But what my favorite memory was when I wasn't working, I was at the greatest studio in the world, and I had it all at my disposal. I could go anywhere I wanted to go. I could go explore. What do 12-year-old little boys like to do? They like to explore. They like to go places they're not supposed to go. But with the studio, and in a 2-year period, there was probably 80 movies that were filmed in that 2 years. Plus, there was the McHale's Navy Lagoon, which was my favorite destination. My uncle supplied horses to Wagon Train and the Virginian, so I'd go see Uncle John. I'd go up and see Mike Westmore at the top of what is now City Walk. Before there was any city there, there was just a little destination with a bathroom and a soda pop and him doing makeup on people. So this was the interesting thing for me. That was my greatest memory, was to spend 2 years at Universal Studios with carte blanche accessibility to wherever I wanted to go. And you can imagine how much fun I had. So that was my favorite Munster memory, and I'd like to thank both you guys for having me on your show.
Thanks so much.
It's
We really
great.
appreciate you coming on. Make sure you go check out Butch's website, and if you're at Wizard World this weekend, make sure you go by and get yourself an autograph, because you have an opportunity here to get an autograph from a living legend.
And remember this, without you guys, it wouldn't be happening. So it's all about the fans.
So thanks for joining us on MetaFan. We'll catch you next time.